So this is the end of 657 through 670. I stopped early on the other one on accident, and then I'll continue going on 670 through 683. To mobilize the American war effort at home, federal and state governments developed a complex strategy of agencies and regulations that controlled everything. George Krill led the War Industries Board that set industrial priorities, coordinating military purchasing, and supervising businesses. The Railroad Board operated the nation's railroads as a unified system, so we take control of that. Food Administration offered relief for Belgium and controlled production and distribution, and the National War Labor Board supervised relations, guaranteeing union organization and collective bargaining. This is just a precursor to World War II, guys. This is our training mission. We make some mistakes. We do a lot of things right as we move along prior to the war. Here are the different organizations, main government organizations. You should know who ran them, which are the people mentioned in your book and we talked about in class. As white jobs shifted, African Americans enjoyed expanded employment. Most of them moved from the South to the North, and African Americans still encountered racism and violence. Here are women working for the first time in some factories wearing what were named womanalls, something that was appropriate for them as well as suitable for working. The war opened manufacturing and other jobs to women that had previously been closed. We financed the war by borrowing money and raising taxes. 2/3 of the cost of the war was aided by Liberty bonds, which they sold to the general public, the banks and wealthy investors. To promote support for the war, we established a propaganda agency and enacted public legislation. The Committee of Public Information sought to manipulate public opinion. So we're just doing everything to try to get Americans behind the war and make the war a grand crusade for liberty and democracy. I really love this Liberty Bonds poster. You have the ocean and the Huns, or the Austro-Hungarians, have defeated and the Germans have defeated. This is like a zombie coming at you with bloody hands, and a bloody bayonet. So it's kind of a shame. They would be back the Huns with Liberty Bonds. They may win in Europe if we don't spend money for it. Two of the things that become increasingly important are the Espionage and Sedition Acts. The Espionage Act provided heavy fines and prison sentences for anybody obstructing the war effort, and it became a weapon to crush dissent. Also, the Sedition Act of 1918 provided severe penalties for speaking or writing against the government or government personnel, which could be the president. I mean, there goes against freedom of speech. But again, a lot of the things, as we'll talk about from here on out, if we're afraid, we will edit those amendments for a short period of time. Radical newspapers and magazines are banned. State and local authorities suppressed anti-war and radical activities. Public hysteria led to absurd German activities, naming hot dogs and not speaking German and not playing German orchestra in some places. Just absolutely insane. Now picking up our new reading, 670 through 683. The Selective Service Act of 1917 instituted a non-wartime for us draft. It registered 24 million men to vote. Roughly 5 million men joined the military. More than 40,000 are women. Full-scale military intervention begins in late spring of 1918, April. And as you can see here, by November 11th, 1918, the war has had a ceasefire. Here's a map of the offenses, the Somme offensive, and the different battles that went on. Again, we don't talk about these in length. If there's a major one, the Battle of Argonne Forest and things like that, the Battle of the Somme that we talk about in the book and we talked about in class, you need to make sure you know those. Here's just a picture of what a cross-section of a trench might look like, and some of the difficulties or problems facing attacking troops, and from no man's land to the different trenches to barbed wire and concrete blockhouses for machine guns, aircraft, long-range artillery. I mean, even when you start doing tunneling like we see here, there's counter-tunneling, and it's a mess. the trench warfare, everybody thought the war was going to be quick because of all these awesome military technologies, and they just dig holes in the ground and protect themselves. Life for American soldiers when we get there is the Battle of Argonne Forest. I mean, it's just pretty self-explanatory. It's pretty much hell on earth. Wilson's peace plan after the war called for 14 points for a more democratic world, including self-determination of nations and the League of Nations, which he's really hoping for, or an organization across the board of individuals, countries who will promote peace so that a world war won't happen like this again. At the Paris Peace Conference at Versailles, the Treaty of Paris moved away from Wilson's program and made Germany accept war guilt cause and pay huge reparations. They have to say it was their fault, and as we know, and we talked about in class, it wasn't their fault that the war happened. The war guilt clause, so that's what that was, and they also had to pay $33 billion in war reparations. Wilson does, which is just astronomically crazy and insane. Wilson did achieve self-determination of some borders and a League of Nations, but when he comes back to America, Americans don't want to be a part of the League of Nations. They just don't. Here is a map of the different countries that are drawn in following World War I. Areas lost by Russia because they're not at the bargaining table because they're in the middle of a revolution. Areas lost by the Ottoman Empire. Areas lost by Bulgaria here, and areas lost by Germany. And Germany doesn't lose very much. I mean, Russia loses way more than that. Austria-Hungary implodes, and all these other countries become part of what was the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Most Americans favored the Treaty of Versailles, but some Republicans opposed it. They love it except for the League of Nations. The Irreconcilables opposed participation in the League and favored restoring civil liberties and reforms at home and reservationists wanted changes. So most Americans, yes, but not the politicians. And people don't want to get drawn into another war, and they feel like they're going to get drawn into another war if they have to join the League of Nations. Wilson takes a tour of the nation trying to get support, has a stroke. And basically unable to get the treaty provisions the way he wants it and to join the League of Nations, he ultimately asks the Democrats to defeat the treaty as amended by the reservationists. So therefore, we do not sign the Treaty of Versailles. We do not join the League of Nations, which is one of the major areas that Wilson wanted to be a part of course. And so we signed a different treaty with Germany later. A severe influenza epidemic kills 700,000 Americans. It's spread, from what we think, by soldiers. Soldiers living in close quarters come back home and spreads the flu throughout America. We bring everybody back at once. The economy, the men from war. This is one of our real big mistakes. We learn from this once World War II begins. We learn from our mistakes from World War I. Women lose their jobs to the men. African Americans who had supported the war and who had improved their race conditions at home experience race riots, and their hopes are gone. I mean, it's a real readjustment period and social conflict problem following World War I. Strikes sweep through industries. Between the economy and the people and influenza, it's a nightmare. Employers use violent strikebreakers, brand strikers as radicals. This is not a good time for America following World War I. The strikes contributed to the anti-Bolshevik hysteria that culminated in the Red Scare of 1919. This is the first Red Scare we accomplished. The Bolshevik Revolution leads to communism being established in Russia. It will then become the Soviet Union. And we're afraid it's going to happen in America. The government leads a campaign of repression, including raids on groups of suspected radicals. They round up 4,000 people in 33 cities. We are scared of communism. Communism is always symbolized by red, so therefore Red Scare. Support for the Red Scare withered with the face of excessiveness and illegal acts going in against what people's, going against their rights. It's rather remarkable. the crazy hysteria that happens with the Red Scare only will do that again after World War II and the Cold War. The election of 1920, Wilson believed the election of 1920 would be a referendum on the League of Nations, and it was. Harding wins the election by promising a return to normalcy, and this starts the run of Republican presidents. And he says that Warren Harding, hold on a second. Sorry about that. Again, Warren Harding comes out of nowhere, wins the Republican candidacy, then runs for president and wins, and just basically was a nobody to then becoming president. And that leads us into what will be the Roaring '20s and things of that nature moving forward, following this period of chaos in World War I. But many changes will be coming following this time period. Many changes had been made before the war with suffrage and prohibition and things of that nature. So it's going to be very interesting to see how we're going to move forward as a country. Again, this is the conclusion of 657 through 670 and the lecture video 670 through 683.